mic is not very loud. I'm going to try and project a little bit, but I do have a fairly loud voice. You should be able to hear me if everyone's here. So, whoever thought it was a good idea to have an Active Directory talk at 9 a.m., I don't know. But also all of you willingly decided to show up in this one. So, if you think this is the OSINT talk, GenericRead is across the way. His is probably going to be more interesting. Also, that walkout song would have been a lot better if I actually brought my banjo. I thought that would be funny, but cool. I have been thinking about this talk for a long time because it's funny. I mean, my work is very technical, but I've never actually given a technical talk because I've never been able to figure out how to make content like that. There's so many things wrong with Active Directory that how you only talk for an hour, essentially. And so I've given a 4-hour training on something that's going to be one slide here. I've given an 8-hour training on on securing Active Directory. But again, this talk is not an exhaustive discussion of Active Directory security. One, I don't want everyone going to sleep. And then two, I only have an hour. This is also not a talk about Azure AD. I'm going to bring that up a few times. The name is horrible. Azure AD, if you think that it has anything to do with Active Directory, aside from the fact that Microsoft makes them both, no. The directory structure, the authentication methods, the everything, they're not the same. So no, I'm only talking about Active Directory security. Most of the stuff that I'm talking about here is not actually applicable in Azure AD because they fixed it and introduced some other nonsense there. I will hint at some stuff there, but again, I only have an hour. So this talk is focused on singularly one section of the attack matrix. It is only on one technique, which is discovery. I will go into the why Active Directory is the way it is. I will go into how to secure it. I will go into the history of it. But most of the things that we hate about Active Directory are intentional, and they're for very good reasons that made a lot of sense 22 years ago or even longer. So I'm going to try and point people in the direction toward fixing those things. Again, this is only an hour. I can't do magic. But first, intro slide. I hate these, but I had to say that I'm not speaking on behalf of my company. So I work for Dragos. Nothing I'm saying here has anything to do with my work. And I don't do anything in the ICS security space. I am the boring side. I secure Dragos. I'm on the internal blue team. So if you think I do any of the fun stuff like Rob and Leslie do, I don't. Yeah. So I drove up to Chattanooga this morning. I love Knoxville. I am a little bummed that this is, I don't know how many people came when this was essentially like codified bar hopping at the conference. I loved it. It was the coolest conference ever. This is still awesome. It has the same vibe. I love B-Sides Knoxville, but I just love the whole like bar hopping. It felt like it felt like what pubs were in like the 1700s, where like some drunk guy stands up and rambles about something for a while. Now I have less excuse to do that because it's in a wedding venue, but so these are my 4 sections here. Why is Active Directory? Why is it the way it is? Again, I could probably, if this was at the bar afterwards, I could probably ramble for an entire hour on just that. Why is Active Directory? That is a fun topic, but I actually want to leave people with something that they can use. What is it? I'm going to do a very brief history lesson, point you towards some better history lessons. Swift on Security actually has some really good stuff, and that's mostly what I'm highlighting because they say it better than I do. I wanted to give a whole kind of primer into how to attack Active Directory. I spelled service wrong. Awesome. But I'm just going to talk briefly about how much of Active Directory is, like, by default, it's configured to let everyone see what they want, and then removing Active Directory default read permissions, which is the whole point of this talk. But I need to set the groundwork first. So first, has anyone in this room worked on Active Directory since before it was Active Directory, since it was Windows NT domains? Anyone? Hands? Wow. I am not old enough to have done that, but I have. Unfortunately, I've done a lot of, yeah, that is older than me, but yet I've had to support it because we're a wonderful industry and we like cool things. Okay, so hands, anyone Windows 2000 AD? Okay, 2003? Wow, we've got some people that have done this for a while. 2008 then. Cool. So, a lot of what I'm talking about is literally things that are 25 years old. If you saw the abstract from my talk, that's the whole premise here, is that we thought about security completely different 30 years ago, 25 years ago. And then Microsoft now is not really supporting non-cloud things, so Active Directory is left on the vine for rocks. So, why is, I'm doing why. Okay, so maybe I'm doing one first. Okay. So, I was going to do a whole history lesson here, but actually these 3 Swift on security threads, dive into them, dive into the subthreads. They are much better than anything that I wrote. So, 1, Active Directory started off, and I'm going to cover the similarities and the differences between Windows NT domains. But the whole premise there is that Windows NT domains had very little security, very flat. You could not segment things out. You couldn't set permissions on individual attributes. It was very black and white. It was, so Active Directory comes and improves on that. The problem here is that Active Directory is simultaneously too large and too small. They tried to include so many things. I don't know how many people are familiar with like actual identity providers and IAM practices, but Active Directory at its core, ADDS, Active Directory Domain Services, is an identity provider. But then they throw on DNS. They throw in all this fancy Kerberos like authentication stuff. They throw in group policy, which is now, it can manage things. They threw in certificate services, and there's all of these things. So Active Directory is way too large. It's more than it should be. And then simultaneously, it's too small. You see, the bottom one here, you can't, I'm going to read it because that's actually really small if you're in the back. The problem with Active Directory is scope. It's not big enough. It's funny because I just said it's too big. It's a system that was sold without tools to make it successful, password self-service, easy group management, automation of per-service delegation, lack of management tool enrollment, naivete, and then abdication, because of course Swift on security, so they throw in some esoteric words. But the point there being, wow, we're going to build this system that makes it super easy for people to manage their networks, and then, we're not going to actually maintain it and give people the tools they need. So there's a lot of things, so there are a lot of tools to extend on Active Directory. For the most part, I would recommend use the cloud if you can. There's reasons you can't, and I will actually get into some of that, but probably I think it's something like 97% of Fortune 500 has Active Directory because you need it. Even the company I'm at, Dragos, we started out completely cloud first. We had no on-premise anything, but then, okay, we have a firewall and we have ESX and we have these legacy things that don't support SAML. So now we have to integrate with LDAP, which means Active Directory. So it's very hard to escape while there's still legacy stuff out there. And then, so this top one, I kind of been jumping around here, but Active Directory has LDAP. It has DNS, it has Kerberos, you can do certificates. It's insane, but then also the naivete, that top right one. I can't understate it enough. Active Directory is a product that believes in humans and expertise. It defines, exposes innumerable interfaces that give you power you desire to demand, but power you should not have. It is the core without the rubber bumper. So, why? I'm actually gonna unpack some of that in organizational context in a second, but Active Directory replaced NT domains in 2000. Windows NT domains were flat. There were no domain trees, no forests, no organizational units. Again, don't know fully what those are in trusts, that's not in scope here, but it was flat. It didn't have all the things you'd expect an identity provider to have, even 5 years later. You could not set permissions at the attribute level, which is going to be really key to some of the stuff I'm going to talk about. And security priorities were different in the year 2000. We used to believe so firmly in the perimeter and the firewall, and we used to think that we were safe inside of our network, and we really needed to focus everything in that perimeter. There's fancy words around that now, deperimeterization and zero trust and all that, but we now assume breach. We do not, and there were people even back then assuming breach. I mean, Cliff Stoll, there's all sorts of stuff, but security priorities were different in the year 2000, so people weren't thinking, well, I need to, I need to make it so people can't see these things. We weren't thinking that. Well, I especially wasn't, because I was not old enough to be thinking these things, but Active Directory has made some major improvements in 08 and 2016, but those were mainly like the bare minimum, things that people have been asking for almost 16 years, but Active Directory has had no functional improvements in the last 6 years. Literally no change except for security patches. So that's why we are where we are. That we're most of our networks at the core of it, most of our identity systems at the core of it is a system that is not built for the problems we have today. Now, here organizational context. Generally when I'm talking Active Directory, you fall into two scopes. Help desk people, sysadmins who think, I've used Active Directory, I'm an expert on it. This is a problem, and this is not gatekeeping. This is not gatekeeping, but the problem is Active Directory is actually back to that problem of being too big and too small at the same time. Most people use one functionality in it, and they think that they know how to use it, and they think they know how to secure it, and I've interviewed a ton of people that will claim like they're an Active Directory expert, and when you go into it, they've never used anything out of ADAS. Active Directory users and computers, which is essentially just how you manage users, and computers and groups and all that. But that is a major problem because you assume that it is easy and you assume it is easy to secure or secure out of the box. Now, generally, that's early in your career. Once you see a bit of Active Directory, you finally go, wait, this thing is completely insecure, let's throw it out, we can't use it. It's not going to be secure. But it's in your network, so you tend to just ignore it because you think it's too complicated. So, you have people over here thinking it's super easy, don't have to secure it. People over here thinking it's super hard to secure, let's not even try it. So like that said, ease of use has tricked people into thinking it doesn't need much attention. Then also it is business critical system. So even if you might be convinced that you need to change it and you can change it, people just say, no, don't touch it. For the most part, I've seen Active Directory domains running 2003, even just a few years ago, that are just running and doing everything you need. So why am I changing this? But the thing is, that's why I am coming at just one problem, just the discoverability here, because this is one of the biggest problems. Getting up to Active Directory functional level 2016 can get rid of a lot of the insecure crypto and the NTLM and all of that nonsense that gives attackers one-click access. There's a lot of other stuff that needs to be fixed too, but to me this is bare minimum. So the thesis here on this slide is Active Directory can be secured, you need to give it some attention, and there are actually ways to go about it carefully without breaking anything. So nothing is black and white. Don't fall into, and for anything, don't fall into these camps that are like, oh, that's super insecure, we can't secure it. No, actually, Active Directory has all of the tools you need to secure it pretty damn well. It does. I also don't love the whole concept that the more bugs you find in we think this is an industry, the more vulns found in something, the less secure it is. I tend to actually think the opposite. For the most part, Active Directory has so many vulnerabilities detected because it is so widely used, there's so many eyes on it. Now there are some problems, but I don't think it's necessarily inherently less secure than much else. It just has some secure defaults that are complete nonsense and need to be reverted. But that goes to the other piece of Microsoft's big problem that actually I think Satya is fixing, is that Microsoft's security problem is that they're backwards compatible forever. Active Directory domains in 2016 are built where every single user in this group is in a group called pre-Windows 2000 compatibility. Because we need to be backwards compatible to everything, and that's actually one of the key problems I'll talk about. But with Windows 11, I think as much as people like to hate on Windows 11 and it, and blah, 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 the UI, they're just trying to make it look like Mac. The key thing to me as a security practitioner and someone who cares about Microsoft products, because they run our organizations, is that they are not supporting all hardware. They actually got rid of a ton of backwards compatibility, and not as much as I would like, but Windows 11 shows that they're willing to break old things. So there is hope. Will Microsoft ever do that for Active Directory? No, because they don't make any money off of it, and they want to move you to the cloud. So, but that could be my point that the key problem here is that Microsoft needs to be backwards compatible forever. And that's just, yeah. It's a major problem in our organization. So, the attack surface. This is not a primer I feel like I'm spending a lot of time talking about things this topic now. But Active Directory, so this is not a primer on the MITRE ATT&CK framework. I'm literally talking about one thing and just from the frame of Active Directory. So here is the very zoomed out MITRE ATT&CK framework. I'm going to zoom in for a second. These are a bunch of tactics, techniques, and procedures that attackers use to target your systems. And if you don't know about it, read about it. But right there are 30 techniques. I think in my abstract I said 26. Apparently it has changed. There are 30 in Discovery. So you can't read all these, a little washed out. But I tried to fit everything here. So these are 30 techniques. I highlighted all of the ones that are by default discoverable in Active Directory. These are things that I'm going to talk about very soon here about how we can get rid of. But account discovery. If you sync with Azure AD, then the next two, the cloud service discovery, cloud infrastructure discovery, domain trust discovery, can't really get rid of that one, unfortunately. File and directory discovery, group policy discovery, fixing that in one of these slides. Network service and network share discovery, password policy discovery, permission groups discovery, all of these things. And what I love about thinking about it this direction is there's a couple reasons I like thinking about it this direction. One, I think attackers, pen testers, anyone on the offense, the red team side, is spoiled, especially by Active Directory. It makes it too easy. They do a couple clicks, they see everything they want. You get rid of things that they're used to just being able to just see, they get confused very quickly. They're like, wait, no, Active Directory, you can't get rid of that. You've broken your Active Directory. Now, you can hide these things. I have not been able to make it so that Bloodhound does not pull anything. I am trying desperately to make Bloodhound, which if you don't know what Bloodhound is, you have to try it on an environment. It is, I assume most people at this point do, but I don't know who's in the audience, so it's a great tool for finding all of these attack pathways in Active Directory. But one of my goals is to figure out how to make your environment almost invisible to Bloodhound. I don't know if it's possible without breaking things, but this isn't even security by obscurity. There are a couple slides in here. I hate security by obscurity, but I'm going to highlight a couple things. This is literally just why would your users need to see these things. There are so many things here that a user does not need to see. Only reason a user would need to see it is if they're actually an attacker for the most part. So think about this through lens of principle of least privilege, least functionality. Let's lock things down. Again, there were those concepts back in 2000s, but we were so spoiled back then by thinking that the perimeter would save us. So some of these are nonsense. System time discovery doesn't tell me enough. I don't know why that's a whole technique, but you can tell me if you're on a red team and you think that's useful. System owner and user discovery is one that actually, yeah. I would love if that was more discoverable. Most environments do not actually input into the system owner, and you just look and there you go, you screen tests. So, yep. So here's the crux of it. Removing Active Directory default read permissions. So I'm going to be showing mostly screenshots and then walking through this, why this is wrong and then how to fix it. So that's actually very small, but I'm going to walk you through it anyways. This is just a default OU. So an OU is an organizational unit. It is not a group. It is a container of other objects. So in this one, I have one called computers. So you see that authenticated users has read, and by default, this is how this one was configured. It's just how Microsoft ships it out of the box. So authenticated users is not a group, it's a service principal, it's dynamic, it means anyone authenticated. So, differentiate that to the one on the top there, everyone. Authenticated users is still it's still better than everyone. Everyone means even if you're not authenticated. That's scary. You see that used in a lot of places, it is just right. You see it a lot of times like network shares. People are like, well, I just want to give everyone access to this. No. So authenticated users is still better, but this is everyone who is authenticated can read everything in this OU. If you hit advanced, you can see that it's this object and sub-object. But I'm also showing this because most people don't realize how easy it could be. Now, dude, I'm going to say don't try these things in prod. I realize I haven't said that yet. Do not just go, that is nonsense. This person shouldn't be able to read that clip because authenticated users is also a misnomer. Computers are users too. This is authenticated objects, authenticated principals. There could be a lot of better names for it, but whatever. We're dealing with what we have here, this is Microsoft. So, computers are user objects that you just don't have to set the password for. They dynamically update their password. So I will talk about it in other slides, that a lot of times when you might have the urge to just say get rid of authenticated users, you could replace it with domain computers in a lot of places. There are obviously computers need to see almost everything in Active Directory. I'll talk a little bit about what they do and don't need to see. Users do not need to see everything. Computers need to be able to see if that user is able to authenticate and all sorts of other things. They need to see group policies because they need to know what applies to them. Do not just remove things. This is more so highlighting that this is the problem. They should not be able to read it. Let's figure out how to fix some of this. And I'm also mostly talking here about default settings. You need to, I will talk in my final slide about tools like Pingcastle and Bloodhound and AD Explorer that are great to discover some of this, but you may have weird things. I actually have the privilege of having only a 3-year-old Active Directory domain that I manage here. That is wonderful. There is not a lot of old, weird crud, but I have seen some nonsense out there. I've seen all sorts of people really well-meaning. The worst is I came into an environment when I was doing a merger and acquisition, and I saw domain users was in the built-in administrators group. Why? Well, everybody, we need people to be able to RDP to their desktops over the VPN. So, like, and this is irreversible, but we can go down for a second. That is the same sort of thinking that gets us into these problems. It's like, well, no, it's just our users. They're not going to do anything bad with it. There's even a built-in remote desktop users group. There's so many better ways to do this, even if you just want to give everyone RDP to everything. People don't realize that, like, what the administrator accounts can do. Don't use your domain admin's accounts for anything except for domain administration. Yeah, You need to have privileged groups. There's I'm going into all of the 100 things that I think that you should do with Active Directory. I'm trying to focus on discovery. So I'm going to, before the biggest problem here, a lot of you probably first heard about this with Print Nightmare, the pre-Windows 2000 compatible access group. I'm going to call it like 3 different things here because I do not want to spell that out. I call it pre-Win2K for the most part in these slides. There's not a lot of other things called that. So, pre-Win2K. If you did not have authenticated users in this, then you weren't vulnerable to most of the things in Print Nightmare. Most people, up until that stuff came out, did not realize that you could actually do anything about this. They just thought, well, Active Directory is just default read. It's a feature, not a bug. It is unfortunately a feature, but we can fix it. There's a funny one here. So this group, it says in the description here that it is a backward compatibility group which allows read access on all users and groups in the domain. Because again, we needed systems to be compatible with Windows NT. If you don't have Windows NT, you do not need authenticated users. But also do not just remove it. Do not just remove authenticated users from this group because you don't see a reason why. I'm going to tell 2 stories here. One, for the most part, I see that people assume, so people either assume you can read everything in Active Directory or no one can read anything. So in that other camp, and no one can read anything, I will see people create service accounts for LDAP binds with domain admin rights because they assume who but domain admins would be able to see all of my objects and my password hashes? What account? But no, if you have your domain set up this way by default, you do not need to put domain admins, your LDAP accounts, LDAP bind accounts into domain admins. Domain users would do it. Technically, no group would do it because it's just authenticated users. So, yeah, people are either camp. Oh, well, I'm just going to put them in domain users because, well, or I'm going to put them in domain admins because obviously this is an elevated service account. So this group is why any user can be used as an LDAP bind account. I also want to point out this is we're only really talking about the users, the user objects here. Authenticated users is separately granted full read on every group object. Not talking about breaking that right now. This is a bigger problem. So, how would I do this? How would you remove this? Like I said, do not just delete it and leave this group empty. There's a reason that, yeah, you are using this. You are taking advantage of this feature for the most part. So what I like to do is remove authenticated users and add domain computers and domain users at first. That is still much better, because that means you're not having guest accounts. You're toning it down a little bit. Now, secondary, go get a list of everything that should be running a SQL service account or an LDAP bind. Now, unfortunately, you probably don't have a good asset inventory, so your admin's not going to be able to give you all of these. So this is why I do this cautiously. So you set up an account called like allow LDAP bind or something. Now there are better delegated ways to do this, but for now, even just having 5-6 accounts in this pre-Win2K group, I'm fine with it. So you get this list, you add those. What I like to do slowly, because you have a lot of groups in your domain, is okay, remove domain computers. And maybe you have another computers group, like maybe you have a bunch of sites around the world and you have your users grouped up into different sites. You can slowly remove those. And I like to break 1 or 2 things at a time so you know what broke. If you break this too quickly, your management is just going to say, hey, stop, you don't need to do this. Do it slowly pare it down. And this is what you call the screen test, okay? You may not have done it in this context, but everyone here has probably done a screen test. What's this computer doing? I have no idea. Let me unplug the NIC and see whose screen. This VM, it doesn't have an owner. It's been running for 16 years with a bunch of uptime. Let me just disconnect the NIC. We've all done screen tests. It is unfortunate. It is like it's like the fire drill of like asset inventories. It's like who owns this? Well, if someone cares enough, they'll tell me. So this is a screen test. Unfortunately, there are ways if you have good monitoring to find all of this. It is not easy. It is just easier, trust me, to do it slowly. You got to communicate to your users. I'm not on your change advisory board. I don't fully care how you do it, but they will tell you got to communicate to your users. And first, you mostly have to communicate to your admins. But yes, SQL, and again, I could give probably, this is a talk that you could probably give for an hour, talking about the different ways to discover and how to create the proper delegation. But slowly swap it out. As you find something, add it into that other group. Do it slowly, do it slowly. And this is pretty easy to revert. If you have a large domain, if you're reverting this, revert it on the most local domain controller so that it gets fixed quickly, so you don't have to force syncs. But yeah, I mean, those are, again, that's just fun administrative stuff. So I've talked about Bloodhound a bit. This isn't actually an Active Directory change. This is a change on your endpoint to connect to Active Directory, but by default, everyone, authenticated users, can enumerate network sessions to everything. Okay? Why does someone in HR need to know who is connected to, like, who has a file share open? They don't. They don't. So, this is a fairly manual process, but there is a PowerShell script down there. Just look up netcs, but there's a GitHub script. So run this on your domain controllers, bare minimum, and again, do it slowly, test it on one level. All that stuff. Don't test things in prod, but if you do, make sure you're ready to revert it. What you would do though is you would run this once on like Windows 10 machine, and then you'd export the reg key and import it into your policy, or just add it to your global image. What I will say is that Bloodhound is super sneaky, and I'm trying to find every single way to catch it. Anyone here is Spectre Ops, I'm sorry, I really want to make your guys' job harder. This should be my job, but unfortunately, Active Directory just makes things too easy for the attackers right now. But this will get rid of one of the major ways that enumeration of accounts accessing shares. Sysvol, all sorts of things. So, password policies. This was a change in 2008, I believe, using fine-grained password policies. The way the password policies legacy were set up, again, I'm not defining all these things for you. GPO, I'm assuming people know. If not, you have a lot of reading. This stuff's fun to me. It may not be for you. But in about 2008, fine-grained password policies became a thing. In 2012, there's a GUI to manage it. Don't install a third-party tool to manage it. Don't install weird shit on your domain controllers, please. Use the Microsoft tool that you have in 2012. There almost needs to be like a roadmap of like, I'm sure someone has it, there needs to be like a roadmap of when certain security features were installed based on, So, for Active Directory. Fine-grained password policies, FTPs, they're also called password security objects. This is how you would set password policies now. In the past, you used the default domain controller policy, the default domain policy. But that meant you had one password policy. So, moving away from my main subject here, one of the beauties of FGPPs or PSOs is that you can say service accounts, you can have 25 character passwords and change this often and have stricter lockout. But your normal user population can have a 12 character password. You can set these things more fine. You could not do that. Even if you thought you were doing it with your policy, it was not working because you could only really have one. The beauty for my actual discoverability talk here is that PSOs are only viewable to users who are applied to that password security object. So you might think that's not that big a deal. Actually, though, I mean, it helps if you know that service accounts have 25 character passwords, well, actually that may scare an attacker away. That actually may be a good thing to expose. But if they can see that maybe you even have something that's stricter that only has 8, not stricter, looser that only has 8, whatever, they can use that information. You just don't want to give, you don't want to give legit information to your, to attackers whenever possible. Hey, if you wanted to create like a honey PSO here and trick them into thinking 175, you can. But into ridiculously long passwords on your service accounts, do it. Create weird things and honey things. But yeah, there's just one more thing. Again, that was one of the techniques there on the MITRE framework in technique. So under the discovery technique, password policy. So I'm back to this slide, but talking about privileged account OpSec. Privileged accounts. So like previously Microsoft called these like tier 0. But anything that is used to administer your domain, figure out ways to hide it. Honestly, so what I would do is create a privileged accounts and groups, administrate. I actually hate the word privileged because I always think it needs a D earlier in the word, so I tend to use administrative instead of privileged. But that has nothing to do with me just not knowing how to spell. But create a special group for your domain admins and for things like that where you have less privileges on there. Test your accounts there so that, again, attackers can't do great things. There's a cool tool called Authlight. I did not get any money for it. They're actually super cheap. I'm not shilling. It's like $45 a user for perpetual license. Authlight is an MFA tool that essentially is a schema update to Active Directory that allows it to support oath tokens, not OAuth, oath tokens, and then other OTPs. So you can use the YubiKey, but not in FidoKey. I can get on into all those logistics. But what is really cool about Authlight is that you wouldn't put any of your users into domain admins. It dynamically adds them to that group by SID only when you've logged in with your YubiKey. So it's another one. This is kind of falling in that security line of security. What I really like there, though, is attackers enumerate your domain admins and they go, wait, there's none except for their default domain admin and their break glass account. What? And then, so I love it because it's one of those. It's there, they can still use it, but the attackers, if they don't know what Authlight is, they just immediately go, what? And then they're trying to target your break glass account. Now you have your break glass account. I don't know how many people follow The Office or watch The Office as closely as me, but I think that your domain admin, specifically your break glass account, should almost generate, if you know what WOOF is, in The Office, it should generate that many alerts for you. You should get a fax and a text, and someone should show up to your front door, and you should get like, every way of notifying you should scream at you every time someone logs in as a domain admin, especially your break glass, because that just should not happen very often. So there's a lot of ways. So this is mainly, I could not have enough slides. I tried writing them, I could not have enough slides on what we would do for OpSec, so I'm covering it verbally. There are so many just things that you should be considering here with your privileged accounts. How to make them less discoverable. Honey admins, do not use your default administrator account. Don't stop using it, you're probably using it, someone is. I worked at, this was ages and ages ago now, but I was at a company, a large automotive manufacturer that their default admin, there were so many logins to their default admin. So they're like, you can't reset it. Like, you can't reset this password. We tried, everyone's using it. So what I did is ask every single person I met, hey, I forgot that admin password. Could you give it to me? And I listed every single, looked at their badge, took a note of every single person in the company who told me the admin account. And it was like 160 people by the end. Not kidding. But then I had a list. And I'm like, so one, this is the problem. And two, now I know who's using it so we can work on this. So what I'm saying is, if you have it enabled, people are using your admin account. So this, again, I hate security by obscurity, but let's use what we have for us. What I love to do with the administrator account is rename it to something, rename it to a user, rename it to John Doe, or generate crazy names. Waldemar stinks, and come up with some crazy name. And so attackers can still find it because there is a built-in SID. But create another account that has no privileges, called administrator. Give it admin count 1, and add it to that same policy that you have to alert the hell out of you when someone tries to log in. Now, at first, you're going to have to tune it because you have things that are trying to log into it. But create a honey user. That'd be a cool way to find these things. That's another OpSec. There's a lot of ways, but the key here is try and hide your domain admins. If you are hiding them, try to rename them to something that's not obviously like domain admin Hudson Bush. Don't do that. Like, sure you can, and I get, you always have to weigh like usability. Don't just give them like numerical usernames because we don't want it to be too complicated, but figure out a way that works within your company to obfuscate your domain admins. So, default domain policy. This is, I do actually have words on this one, but couple things. One, do not rename your default domain policy. Don't do it. Don't make major changes to this. That is, but what I'm highlighting here is that security filtering on all group policies, when you create them, is set to authenticated users, which means that again, we've talked about authenticated users already. That means all authenticated users can read and enumerate everything in your group policies, which means that attackers can see whatever good or bad things you have in there. They can see, maybe you have dedicated boxes that have less hard link. You know, they could use this for all sorts of things. There is I do have a resource slide at the end, but there's a tool called Grouper2 by Mike Loss, who actually built group policy back in the day, Australian dude. He made the product that eventually became group policy, but he has a tool called Grouper2 that goes and pulls all your group policy information and finds all your misconfigurations. So one of the biggest ways to fix this is do not keep authenticated users in there. Authenticated users is given default scope on group policy objects as you create them. This is tricky because Microsoft actually in 2008 changed the way the group policies are applied. So you may think, I'm applying user settings. I need to apply this to a user OU. Why isn't it working? Group policies are applied to computers. Computers are what needs to be in scope. Your users actually don't need to read them. It's just how it's applied, trust me. So domain computers as a scope is a good quick fix here. So what I'm saying is remove authenticated users, and you can, almost without breaking anything, you can add domain computers to every one of your group policies, unless you have a loopback policy. If you have a loopback policy, add domain users again. But for the most part, domain computers is a scope in your group policies, a good quick fix. Now, unfortunately, if your users are admins and your attackers are admins, then they can run a system. This still gets rid of a lot of this, but you really should be scoping so that only people who need to, only computers specifically, or users if loopback, but domain computers is a good quick fix, but you should be scoping this down to just the computers that need that policy. You have it just for HR computers or just your jump boxes. Create groups. Microsoft has ways to create. There's already scripts for like, I forget what they call them, but it's like shadow groups where you can map a group to an OU. There's all sorts of cool stuff here, but just the key is, I'm actually, when I get to resources, I'm going to talk about Grouper2 a bit more. But just try and do it almost immediately. Remove authenticated users, add domain computers. I'm already on resources, so I'm going to talk about each of these tools and what they do. Reading, there is so much reading you can do, but really, three of the biggest people that I follow are Nedpile, Pyrotech, which is AD Security, Sean Metcalf, and Harm Joy. So, but This is where, like, almost hack yourself first, test these things. If you think that you can't see anything in Active Directory, test these things. Look at sysinternals, Microsoft Tool, AD Explorer. Just open it up and see what your users can see by default. Just look through your Active Directory, see all the attributes that are just exposed. Grouper 2, so on top, the discoverability here is crazy and it'll show you stupid configurations. Like if you're not using laps yet and you're setting passwords and you have passwords decryptable in group policy, it'll show you that password. If I've seen some crazy things where like someone is running an executable at startup for every computer, but then that executable is writable by the everyone group. So an attacker could change that executable and put a malicious executable, and it's already in your, they don't even have to do anything really, they just throw a malicious executable and you've already told it to run. So Grouper 2 is great because it will tell you every single thing that is misconfigured in group policy. Ping Castle, everything I've talked about, Ping Castle covers it much better than I did. It's a cool report. You can use, so Ping Castle, it does a bunch of misconfigurations. It'll also do kind of Bloodhound light stuff. It'll tell you some like base attack wave. But Bloodhound is the, okay, if I wanted to get to the crown jewels, I want to get into a domain controller. What accounts have access to something, you know, it shows you the whole map. So use these three things, audit, get scared shitless about what you can see, and then this will motivate you to actually fix them. Bloodhound Enterprise, and so I threw a little bit of shade towards SpectreUp, so I'm going to come back. If you are on the Glue team though, Bloodhound Enterprise is not that expensive. It means you don't have to run your own Neo4j, and it can generate reports for you. Bloodhound Enterprise will save you a lot of time and actually give you executive reports until you have to fix this stuff. So Grouper 2 and Bloodhound though are not Blue team tools. They're not made for us. You have to kind of do some tweaking and some squinting of your eyes to look and see them through the lens that we need. Ping Castle, absolutely, it's made for defenders. Also, they have a paid version, throw them on because they're great. But yeah, yeah, that is it. So if the best way to ask me questions, I will not be doing questions after this. There's too much you can find me drinking. Or, my handle is HomebrewSec. The world's greatest irony because I now am allergic to gluten and I cannot drink beer. I used to homebrew. So, but I kept the name. I feel like it's okay. So, but all that to say that tweet me, find me. I will talk about these things. I love to talk about these things. There's just no Q&A right now. But I will be hopefully releasing a report template that I've used in the past when I was consulting that you could use to essentially report these findings to your C-suite, to your CISO, to your IT manager, whoever it is. I have it ready. The only problem is that I am locked out of my GitHub because I don't have my old email address, so I cannot figure out how to upload it. But when I fix that, there will be, these slides will be available on my website, homebrewsec.com/talks, and that template will be there. So again, thank you for all of you masochists who thought Active Directory at 9 in the morning was a good idea, but I hope I informed you of something useful.